So, uh, so I thought of just doing a few more things for the last session for today. And one of the kind of nice accounts in the Vinaya is the account of a fellow called Sona Kutikanna, who was trying very hard to get ordained. It was very difficult for him to get ordained. And sometimes you have to be very persistent to be able to ordain. We had a monk who ordained with us at Bodhinyana Monastery, and he had to wait 5 years to be able to ordain because it was so hard to get room. So he was an young English monk, and he always thought he wanted to become a monk under Ajahn Brahm, and I encouraged him to do that, but said, maybe you want to ordain somewhere else because it might take a long time. And eventually, just recently, he was able to ordain with us. And he was crying on his ordination because finally he got to do it. It was kind of really touching, kind of emotionally powerful ordination ceremony. Because eventually be able to do something they've been trying so hard to be able to do. It was kind of extraordinary. And so sometimes you have to be very kind of really just carry on, persevere to be able to do those things that are when they really are worthwhile. So let's have a look at the story of Sona Kutikanna and how he ordained and see what happens with him. So again, I'll just read out the story and then we will discuss some of the issues here as we go along. So this particular story is found in what is called the Chamma Khandaka, the fifth Khandaka. It's the chapter on skins. It's all about leather and these kind of things. And what kind of leather is allowable, etc., etc. So this is how it goes. At one time, Venerable Mahakachana was staying in Avanti on Papataka Hill at the Kuraragara. At that time, a lay follower, Sona Kutikanna, was his supporter. So we have the Venerable Mahakachana, one of the very famous monks in the suttas. He was one of those who was the foremost expert in expounding what the Buddha taught in brief, and he could expound that thing in length. And he was staying in a faraway country called Avanti. And some of these faraway countries, they were kind of rough and difficult. There's one nice story in the suttas of a monk called Punna in the Punavada Sutta. And Punna was staying in this faraway country. Thank you. That is so thoughtful of you. That's very, very nice. So, so he was staying in the faraway Sunaparanta country. Well, he wasn't actually staying there, but he wanted to go there. And so he says to the Buddha, can I would like to go and stay in the Sunaparanta country. And the Buddha says to him, well, the people in the Sunaparanta country are really rough. Yeah, not like in Singapore, people are really nice, but the really, really rough people, I don't know, like maybe, where are people really rough? I have to be careful now. So let's say somewhere, maybe Mars or something like that, where people are really rough, somewhere far away. And so, what if they abuse you? Well, if they abuse me, I will, thank them for not hitting me, says Puna. Yeah, the Buddha's getting a little bit impressed already. Yeah, wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so you just thank them for not hitting you. But what if they do hit you? Well, I will then say thank you for not kind of throwing stones at me, throwing rocks at me. Yeah. But what if they throw rocks at you? Well, then I say thank you for not kind of stabbing me with a knife. Yeah. But what if they stab you with a knife? Well, I will say thank you for not killing me. But what if they kill you? Well, then I will say that, well, there are some monks in the Sangha, they have to search for a knife to get killed. I didn't even have to search for it. It just happened automatically. And then the Buddha says, wow, with that kind of attitude, yeah, you can go to the Sunaparanta country. You will be fine. Yeah, you will be able to deal with the rough people in the Sunaparanta country. And so you can see, it can sometimes be a little bit like this. If if you want to be a Buddhist and let's say that you grow up in a non-Buddhist country, yeah, let's say you grow up in a maybe sometimes the Muslim countries can be quite difficult. Yeah, we have some supporters in Perth who had to flee from Muslim countries because it was impossible to be a Buddhist in those Muslim countries. It was, in other words, very difficult to convert from Islam to becoming a Buddhist. It wasn't really allowed. Places like Pakistan, for example, and he had to flee, and he got a refugee visa in Australia because of that. So these things can happen even in the present day. It can be difficult sometimes. And sometimes you have to be very persistent to be able to, to do this. So that's kind of Avanti was a little bit like that, yeah, a rough kind of place. So Mahakachana, this great monk, is staying there, and he has a lay supporter called Sona Kutikana. Then on one occasion, Sona went to Mahakachana. He bowed, sat down, and said, "Venerable, the way I understand your teaching, it is not easy for one who lives at home to lead the spiritual life perfectly complete and pure as a polished conch shell. I wish to cut off my hair and beard, put on the ochre robes, and go forth into homelessness. Please give me the going forth." So this is kind of the standard way of asking for the going forth, yeah? You understand the significance of the monastic life, and so you decide to do that. And what does Mahakachana say? He's not as open as Ajahn Brahm was with me. He says, "It is difficult, Sona, to live the spiritual life all one's life, eating one meal a day and sleeping by oneself. So follow the Buddha's instruction while remaining as a householder. At suitable times, you can eat one meal a day, sleep by yourself, and abstain from sexuality." In other words, keeping the 8 precepts. You can do that at certain times. As a result, Sona's intention to go forth died down. A second time, Sona asked Mahakachana for the going forth, but got the same response. A third time, he asked for the going forth, and finally, Mahakachana relented. Yeah, so you have to be really persistent if you want to go forth. So sometimes you have to be like super duper persistent. One of the famous stories that I like to tell all the time, and some of you have heard this story many times before, is of Ratapala. Yeah, many of you will know the story of Ratapala. And Ratapala heard teaching Buddha. He was really, really inspired. And then he says, "Oh, please give me the going forth." And the Buddha says to Ratapala, "But you have to get your parents' permission before I can allow you to go forth." And Ratapala, "Yeah, I will definitely get my parents' permission." And he goes back to his parents and says, "Give me the permission, I wish to go forth." His parents say, "No." "We're not going to give you permission. You are our only son. You have been looked after well. You have living in comfort and all this. Why on earth you want to give forth? Go forth. There's no way we're going to allow you to go forth. Enjoy the household life. Yeah, do whatever, but don't go forth." Radhapala says, "Well, in that case, I will lie down on the floor right here, and I will either die right here on the floor, or you allow me to go forth." That's kind of called blackmail, yeah? So you have to blackmail your parents sometimes, and of course, they don't want you to die, so eventually, okay, can go forth, yeah? Better to go forth and not die than actually dying on the floor right here. That's kind of how persistent you have to be. So anyone like that here? Anyone kind of, yeah? Sometimes this is the way to go. Anyway, so eventually Mahakachana relents. And at that time, in the southern region of Avanti, there were few monks. Only after 3 years, with much trouble and difficulty, was Mahakachana able to gather a sangha of 10 monks from here and there to give the full ordination to Venerable Sona. Yeah, getting 10 monks is very difficult when you live in a faraway country like Australia. Yeah, these days you get 10 monks, but when Ajahn Brahm originally went to Australia in 1983, impossible to get 10 monks in Australia, even though Australia is this enormous place. Was it possible then? Maybe if you kind of really scrape together to the bottom of the barrel, you can find 10 monks somewhere. I don't know. But it's very, very difficult, yeah, in those days to find 10 monks. Now it is no problem anymore. But it's hard to start out from scratch like this. And so after 3 years, he had to wait to become a monk. Then he was able to ordain, and after completing the rainy season residence, Sona was reflecting in private I've heard that the Buddha is like this and like that, but I haven't seen this for myself. If my preceptor allows me, I shall go and visit the Buddha, the perfected one, the fully awakened one. Coming out from seclusion, Sona went to Mahakachana, bowed, sat down, and told him what he had thought. Mahakachana said, "Well thought, Sona. Please go and visit the Buddha, the perfected one, the fully awakened one. You will see someone who is pleasing to the eye and inspiring confidence, who is peaceful in mind and faculties, who is attained to the supreme subduing and calm, who is tamed, guarded, and restrained in his senses, a great being." Yeah, so this is kind of how the Buddha was known. Yeah, someone who is inspiring and pleasing to the eye, someone who is special. Sometimes when you see them, you realize there's something behind the facade that is very special and very unique. And this is why they say in the suttas that even just seeing an arahant in one's life is a great blessing. Because when you see an arahant, you see something out of the ordinary that inspires you, that draws you towards the Dhamma, if you are ready. Some people never see that because they're not ready, but if you're ready, you will see those things. So he is encouraging his disciple. Then, Sona, in my name, pay respect with your head at the Buddha's feet and say, "Sir, my preceptor, Venerable Mahakachana, pays respect with his head at the Buddha's feet." And then say this. In the southern region of Avanti, sir, there are few monks. Only after 3 years, with much trouble and difficulty, was it possible to gather a sangha of 10 monks from here and there to give me the full ordination. Would the Buddha allow a smaller group of monks to give the full ordination in Avanti? Yeah, so the idea here is to give special rules, yeah, for certain places. And of course, this is exactly what the Buddha does. And that's why these days in Singapore and in Australia, you only need 5 monks to give the ordination. But if you go to India, in the central Ganges plain, yeah, you have to have 10 monks or 10 nuns to ordain. So that's kind of the problem there, yeah? That central area, because there used to be so many monks, actually these days it should be the other way around, because there are no monks left in the Ganges plain, but there's lots of monks everywhere else. So they should have 5 and we should have 10. Yeah, that's good. I reckon. So there are all these special rules that are, some of these rules are only kind of for the central Ganges plain, other rules are for the rest of the world. Now, one of the rules that is for the central Ganges plain, you're only allowed to bathe once a fortnight. You know that rule? Yeah. You don't look too happy with that rule. So I was recently in India. I was traveling with a number of you to India. And that means I'm a monk. I'm in the central Ganges plain. Oh, you had that's scary, right? That's kind of a bit troublesome. So I was looking around if anyone was noticing anything. I was traveling along. No, that's actually not quite correct because there are exceptions to all the rules. One of the exceptions, if you're traveling, you can bathe as much as you like. So I made use of that exception. So if you, so there was no danger to your noses or anything like that. You were on safe grounds. But it's interesting, yeah. Actually, maybe in ancient India, it wasn't considered so important to bathe all the time. Maybe you could wash or do whatever, but you didn't necessarily need to bathe so much. And no, I had nothing to do with water because they would bathe in the rivers and all those kind of things. There was another reason for that rule, and I can tell you the other reason. You want to know the reason for the rule? Don't want to know? Okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay, that case. No. I was asking, do you want to know? You said no, don't want to know. Yeah, yes, okay. I was very surprised at your lack of curiosity. So I was. Yeah, so the reason is as follows. And the reason is that you probably heard this story before, but I'll tell it again. And this was in the evening or in the afternoon. King Bimbisara went to the hot springs of Rajagaha to bathe. Yeah, you were there in the hot springs. Yeah, you know the hot springs in Rajagaha, and they are there in the present day, still not yeah, on the foot of the hill in Rajagaha. There in the present day, the Indians are still bathing in the hot springs in Rajagaha, still after 2,500 years. Nothing much changes in India. It's pretty much the same. And so he went there to bathe. In those days, it was more like a beautiful grove. Now there's lots of people and everything happening there. This is kind of how it goes. And so he goes to bed, but when he gets there, the monks are already bathing. And so because the monks are bathing, he is too respectful to say anything. So he sits down and waits. And the monks, they bathe and they bathe and they bathe. They never stop bathing. And the king has to wait. And eventually, by the time he gets to bathe, it's already dark. And then he goes back and he can't get into the city because the doors of the city are closed. This is kind of what I mean by small-time king, yeah? You can't even get into your own city here. What kind of king is that? Yeah, they're really small-time kings, these kings. There was no kind of, not much power or anything like that. And so then early in the morning, he can't go into the city, so he comes to the Buddha, and he kind of looks really kind of terrible because he hasn't slept properly, and his makeup is kind of, those kings they use makeup, so his makeup is all over the place. And the king and the Buddha says, well, look at you, king, yeah, you're looking a bit terrible. What happened to you? And he tells the story. And then the Buddha lays down the rule, you can only bathe once a fortnight. So that's the story behind the rule, yeah? And so I think it's kind of nice, yeah. Maybe it's enough to bathe once a fortnight. I think these days, I reckon we bathe too much. Okay, in Singapore, you have to bathe off because it's so sticky in Singapore. If you bathe once a fortnight in this country, you get in serious trouble. But in some places, yeah, maybe not necessary. Like in Australia in the cold season, yeah, when it's really cold, you don't sweat very much. It's kind of okay. And after a while, the people get used to you anyway. You're And as a monk, you want to be alone? Yes, it's a good idea not to smell too much, not to be too clean. So that is the rule anyway. So So anyway, so that is that is one of the rules then that was laid down by the Buddha, special rules that are allowable in certain places. And then it goes on about having sandals, so you can have sandals and avanti because the ground is really rough. And the people there, it says here, they value bathing and cleanliness, so you can bathe more often. So that's actually also there. You're allowed to use skins because that was used in those areas. And so he asks for all of these special things, yeah, which the Buddha actually allows. So the Buddha is very flexible, yeah. Rules are not set in stone. They're not absolute. They are changed according to circumstances and situations. So anyway, eventually Sona says yes. He gets up from his seat, he bows down, circumambulates Mahakachana with his right side towards him, and then put his dwelling in order. He takes his ball and robe and sets out for Savatthi, which is where the Buddha is staying here. When he eventually arrived, he went to the Jeta Grove, Anathapindika's monastery, where he approached the Buddha, bowed and sat down. And the Buddha said to Venerable Ananda, Ananda, please prepare a resting place for this newly arrived monk. Ananda thought, when the Buddha says this, it means he wishes to stay in the same dwelling as Venerable Sona. And he prepared a resting place for Sona in the Buddha's dwelling. That's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah, and it must obviously, this means that he had very high regard for Sona. Sona was someone very special, and he wanted maybe to have a chat with him, yeah, to see how things were going or whatever. This is kind of, again, quite nice. Yeah, it's one of these kind of strange little things that you find in the sutta. So this monk, he was staying in the same dwelling as the Buddha. So he does that, he prepares that resting place in the Buddha's dwelling. Then, after spending much of the night outside, the Buddha entered the dwelling, as did Sona. Rising early in the morning, the Buddha said to Sona, recite a teaching, monk. Saying, yes, sir, he chanted the entire chapter of 8s. Yeah, the chapter of 8s is from the Sutta Nipata. Sutta Nipata, it has 5 chapters. The 4th one is called the Atthaka. Atta is 8 in Pali, so Attaka is of 8s, relating to 8s, so the chapter of 8s. And that chapter is a beautiful set of verses. It's all in verse, and it's all very inspirational. It's about the practicing the path and what it means to be an arahant and all of these kind of things. Very, very nice and inspirational. And so he then showed his ability to understand the teaching by reciting this in the presence of the Buddha. Yeah, and that's kind of really nice. And so this is one of the cases where certain suttas are referred to elsewhere in the suttas, referred to in the Vinaya. And this is one of the things that you find, how these suttas are referred to, from one place to another one and back and forth like this. So you have a feeling of a whole, yeah? Everything relating to each other back and forth in this way. And so this is kind of what makes it seem as if these suttas are an integrated set that was given at roughly the same time, because they refer to each other in this way in many different places. This is one of these places. So maybe you too should read the Atthakavagga. Have you read the Atthakavagga, Wilson? No? Okay, now this is your opportunity here. Fourth chapter of the Sutta Nipata. You find it on Sutta Central. So check it out. So actually, do you still go by the name Alang, or do you go by Wilson these days? You go by Alang? Okay, I should have called you Alang then. Why am I calling you Wilson? I should call you Alang instead. That's great. Okay, so he chanted the chapter ways. When he was finished, the Buddha said, "Well done, Sona, well done. You have learned the chapter of 8 well. You have remembered it well. And you have a good voice, it's clear and articulate and gets the meaning across." Yeah, so the Buddha is kind of commending you, yeah, for learning it well. And this is another kind of case of how the Buddha relates to his monastics. Yeah, he relates to the people around him as a human being. He praises you when you need a bit of praise, and he might tell you off a little bit if you need to be told off a little bit. That also happens in the suttas occasionally. The Buddha kind of comes across very human, yeah, the interaction that he does. Sometimes one of the monks will be repairing a robe, and the Buddha will go to him and say, well done for repairing your robe. Yeah, what a wonderful thing that is, that you repaired your robe properly. He walks around the dwellings in the monastery, and he does that quite regularly, walking around the dwellings. All of these things are what you see in the suttas. So it's really it's very human, yeah, and very, it's a nice way to kind of see the Buddha like this. And then he says, "How long have you been a monk?" 1 year, sir. But why did it take you so long to go forth? Well, I have long seen the downside of worldly pleasures. Still, because the household life is crowded and busy, I was not able to leave. And seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered a heartfelt exclamation. Having seen the downside of the world, knowing the truth beyond ownership, the noble one doesn't delight in the bad. In the bad, the pure one doesn't delight. So basically, yeah, sometimes you see the downside in things, but because you are busy and because all the things are going on, it's actually hard sometimes to leave the household life. And you see people who are sometimes very, very inspired by the Dhamma and maybe would like to become monks, actually, or nuns. Actually, sometimes very difficult to do that because of the kind of bindings and responsibilities you have. And so actually you can't do it. So when you get the opportunity, you actually take that opportunity and then you go forth. So the Buddha is saying this verse. I'm not entirely sure exactly how it relates to what was happening to Sona, but basically the idea here is that when you see the downside of the world, knowing the truth beyond ownership, yeah, then you live well. I guess Sona was living well in the same way, and you don't delight in bad things. Then Sona thought, the Buddha approves of me. This is the time to bring up what my preceptor said. And then he brings up all of those questions that Mahakachana asked him to bring up, and then eventually he gives him the allowance to do those things. That's the story of Venerable Sona Kutikanna. Yeah, they're kind of little stories. There's nothing kind of very spectacular about them or very marvelous. There are some stories that are really spectacular and marvelous, but I have deliberately not chosen them because I don't know. it's not, for me, it doesn't kind of bring out what the Dhamma really is about. What the Dhamma really is about is the little things, the kindness, the generosity, the way to deal with life in a good way. That's what it really is about. It's not about these amazing and marvelous stories, etc. So, we don't have all that much time left. I said I was going to read out some of the stories of what's behind some of the rules, yeah? And I will do that now, just to give you some of the stories behind some of the rules. So let's see if I can find it here, because okay. So this is the story behind the rule on not drinking alcohol. You can imagine that might be exciting, right? That might be an interesting story. You can imagine what happened there. So this is why monks are not allowed to drink alcohol. This is the story behind that. So on one occasion, when the Buddha was wandering in the country of Cheti, on his way to Bhadavatika, he was seen by a number of cowherds, shepherds, farmers, and travelers. They said to him, "Sir, don't go to Ambatita. There is a highly venomous dragon with supernormal powers there in the hermitage of a dreadlocked ascetic." Yeah, in those days, the ascetics, they were dreadlocked. They had like a bit like the Rastafarians. Yeah, they had kind of this long hair that was completely interlocked together, and they were a bit like that. That's why I called it a dreadlocked ascetic. So it was never translated like that before. Me, I'm the first one to translate like that. I just want to make claim to some firsts, yeah, in my translations. Don't let that dragon harm you. Then the Buddha was silent. They repeated their quest a second and a third time, and the Buddha remained silent. The Buddha then continued on to Bhadavatika, and he stayed there. Just then, Venerable Sagatha went to the hermitage of that dreadlocked ascetic and entered his fire hut. After preparing a spread of grass, he sat down, crossed his legs, straightened his body, and established mindfulness in front of him. Yeah, this is what you do when you're going to practice anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Seeing that Sagatha had entered the fire hut, the dragon was upset and emitted smoke. Sagatha too emitted smoke. This is what, if you're a powerful monk, you emit smoke. It's one of the things you do. So if you see a monk emitting smoke, whoa, be careful. The dragon was not able to contain his rage, and he emitted flames. Sagatha entered the fire element, and he too emitted flames. Then, after conquering fire with fire, Sagatha went to Bhadavatika. So in other words, Sagatha conquered the dragon, yeah, by emitting fire with fire and by using his ability to enter the fire element. He kind of overcame the dragon, yeah. This is what kind of monks do sometimes, at least in these stories. And this is also what the Buddha did, according to the story. He also conquered a dragon. So this is a very similar story to that. And then, having conquered that dragon, then Sagatha went to Bhadavatika, where the Buddha was staying. After staying at Bhadavatika for as long as he liked, the Buddha set out wandering towards Kosambi. When he arrived, the lay followers there received him. But the lay followers at Kosambi had heard about Sagatha fighting the Ambatita dragon. And so after receiving the Buddha, they went to see Sagatha. They weren't all that interested in the Buddha because they heard about the dragon fighting, yeah? It's just like now when people hear about supernormal powers, that's what they're interested in. Wisdom is not so important. Supernormal powers, oh, let's hear those stories. And so they bowed and they stood to one side and said, "Venerable, what can we prepare for you that is delicious but hard to get?" Yeah, they want to support Venerable Sagatha with something special because he can conquer dragons with fire. The monks from the group of 6 replied. They didn't wait. Group of 6 are the dodgiest monks. Yeah, they are really, really dodgy. They do everything possible that is bad. That is what they do. So instead of giving Sagatha a chance to say something, they replied on his behalf. And what do they say? They say the following: "There is a delicious liquor called 𝐾𝐽𝑒𝐿𝑒𝑘a, which is hard for the monks to get. Prepare that. And the lay followers prepared 𝐾𝐽𝑒𝑙𝑒𝑘a in house after house. Then, when they saw that Sagatha had entered the town for alms, they said to him, "Drink, Venerable, drink the 𝐾𝐽𝑒𝑙𝑒𝑘a liquor." Sagatha drank that liquor in house after house. And as he was leaving town, he collapsed at the town gate. This sounds like what happens at nightlife in Singapore, right? When you someone drinking too much collapsing in the bar or something like that. Does it happen in Singapore? So, occasionally, yeah, it happens. Happens in most cities around the world, I think. Yeah. Just then the Buddha, together with a number of monks, was also leaving town, and he saw Sagatha at the town gate. He said, "Monks, pick up Sagatha." It's like you pick up your friend at the bar, yeah, you carry him home, yeah. Saying, "Yes, sir," they led him to the monastery, where they put him down with his head towards the Buddha. So they're always supposed to have your head towards the Buddha, yeah? So this is kind of the idea here. But Sagatha turned around, pointing his feet towards the Buddha. He was so drunk, he didn't know what he was doing, so he turned around in his drunkenness. And the Buddha said, "Previously, monks, wasn't Sagatha respectful and deferential towards me?" "Yes, but is he now?" "Certainly not." "Just recently, didn't Sagatha fight the Ambatita dragon?" "Yes." "Would he now be able to fight a dragon?" "Certainly not." "So, monks, should one drink that which makes one senseless?" "Certainly not, sir." And then, based on that, yeah, I think, I can't remember, I think there was someone who translates this as, "Would he now even be able to fight the lizard?" or something like that. And they say, "No, he wouldn't be able to do that." And then a salamander, is it? Okay, salamander. Okay, thank you so much. And then the Buddha lays down the rule against drinking alcohol, yeah? So if it hadn't been for Venerable Sagatha, maybe monks could still drink in the present day. I don't know. Probably not. I think it's probably a very bad idea. So that is the rule behind that. Yeah. So what do you think? Yeah. These are some of the stories. That is one story. Let's go on to another story. I'm going to... Okay, this is a story from the nuns' rules. Yeah, so we often look at the monks' rules. This is one of the stories from the nuns, and this is a training rule on abusing monks. So at one time, when the Buddha was staying in the hall with the peaked roof in the great wood near Vesali, Venerable Pali's preceptor, Venerable Kapita, was staying in a charnel ground. A charnel ground is a place where they burn the corpses. Yeah, so monks would often stay there because it was very peaceful, because no one would go to the charnel ground, especially at night. It was too dangerous, too many ghosts, so they would stay away from the charnel grounds. At that time, the leader of the nuns from the group of 6 had just died. Yeah, so one of the strange things about the Vinaya is that you have the group of 6 monks and you have the group of 6 nuns. And the group of 6 nuns are also very naughty, yeah? Not just the group of 6 monks, you have naughty nuns and you have naughty monks. And so the leader had just died. And they took her to that charnel ground, cremated her near Venerable Kapita's dwelling, because he had a dwelling on the charnel ground, and made a stupa. Yeah, so they made a stupa close where. And then they went there to cry. After making a stupa, whenever they needed to cry because their leader had died, they would go there and cry. Venerable Kapita was disturbed by the noise, and so he demolished the stupa and scattered the rubble. Well, that's pretty rough, right? That's not very nice. You build a stupa for your favorite nun you have cremated there, and some kind of monk who doesn't really have any respect for the nuns, he just demolishes your stupa. That's kind of really bad. Now, these nuns were famous for being a bit rough, so you can imagine what happens next. The nuns from the group of 6 thought, "Kapita has demolished our venerable stupa. Let's kill him." And they laid a plan. A certain nun told Venerable Upali what was happening, yeah, and he in turn told Venerable Kapita. Venerable Kapita then left his dwelling and went into hiding. Soon afterwards, the nuns from the group of six, they went to his dwelling and crushed it with rocks and lumps of earth. When they thought he was dead, they left. The following morning, Venerable Kapita robed up, took his bowl and robe, and entered Vesali for alms. When the nuns from the group of six saw him, they said, Kapita is alive. Who spoiled our plan? And in this way, the kind of then when they heard it was Venerable Upali, they abused him. How could this barber, this dirt remover of inferior caste, spoil our plan? Yes, they basically were abusing Venerable Upali because he was from a lower caste or whatever. And then, based on all of that, eventually the Buddha lays down a rule, yeah, that the nuns should not be abusing monks. That is the rule that comes down. There was nothing about trying to kill a monk. That seemed to be okay, but that shouldn't abuse the monk. That was the problem. That was the issue. So I think this rule probably should have laid down many rules based on this story. Yeah, no demolishing of stupas, no killing of monks, no abusing, or probably deserved many kinds of rules. So this is, I tell you, it's kind of entertaining, yeah, to read some of these stories. So okay, so one more story, and then we will can come back to the to some Q&A again. So this last story is from Pachitya number 2, and this is a training rule on abusive speech. This is a general rule on abusive speech. So at one time, the Buddha was staying at Savatthi in 𝑒𝑟𝑒𝑠 monastery. The monks from the group of six were arguing with and speaking abusively to the good monks. They reviled and insulted them about their caste, their name, their family, their occupation, their profession, their illnesses, their physical traits, their defilements, and their offenses, and by calling them names. The monks of few desires complained and criticized them. How can the monks from the group of six argue with and abuse the good monks? How can they revile and insult them about these things? After rebuking those monks in many ways, they told the Buddha. Soon afterwards, the Buddha had the Sangha gathered and questioned the monks. Is it true, monks, that you are doing this? It is true, sir. Then the Buddha rebuked them. Foolish men, how can you do this? And after rebuking them, he gave them a teaching and addressed the monks. Now, one of the things you will notice, the Buddha always asks, first of all, is it true that you are doing this? Yeah, in other words, he doesn't just assume things. He always hears both sides of the story. And then he gives a teaching. The teaching is as follows. Once upon a time, this is another Jataka. They always start, once upon a time, yeah? Pubba something previously. There was a Brahmin in Takasila who had an ox called Nandi Visala. Nandi Visala is a famous Jataka story, and this is the same story basically. On one occasion, the ox said to that Brahmin, Go, Brahmin, and bet 1,000 coins with the wealthy merchant that your ox will pull 100 cards tied together. And that Brahmin did just that. Then after tying 100 cards together and yoking the ox Nandi Visala to them, he said, Go, you fraud, pull, you liar. But Nandi Visala didn't budge. Then that Brahmin became depressed because he had lost 1,000 coins. Nandi Visala said to him, Why are you depressed? Because I lost 1,000 coins because of you. But why do you disgrace me by calling me a fraud when I'm not? Now go, Brahmin, and make the same bet with that merchant, but increase the stakes to 2,000 coins. Yeah? But don't disgrace me by calling me a fraud. It's kind of handy to be able to talk to the animals. Yeah. Once again, that Brahmin did just that. Then after tying 100 cards together and yoking Nandi Visala to them, he said, Go, good ox, pull, good ox. And Nandi Visala pulled those 100 carts. And then the verse comes, one should say what is pleasant, never what is unpleasant. Because of pleasant speech, heavy loads were pulled, and he obtained wealth, and he was delighted with that. If you want to get your way in the world, speak pleasingly. That's kind of the idea. Even at that time, monks, reviling and insulting was unpleasant to me, because here the ox was the bodhisattva in a past life. How then could reviling and insulting be pleasant now? And then he lays down the rule against abusive speech. And this is what this rule is about. Yeah? It's kind of it's a nice little story. It's a little bit worldly, yeah? The idea is that if you want to get things done in the world, if you want to get your way, then speak very nice words to Pang Hong, yeah? Then he might be able to, he will remember you, oh, Pang Hong, what wonderful to see you, wow, so delightful. But use it, but it has to come from the heart. It has to be real. That's part of the point as well, yeah? So if you want to praise somebody and you want to say kind words, yeah, if it is real, if it's coming from your heart, then it's okay. But if it's a kind of empty praise or whatever, then it's not so nice. But let it be true. And this becomes then a nice way of speaking. That's kind of the idea here. That's the nice little, cute little story of Nandi Visala, very famous story from the Jatakas. Anyway, enough stories. So,
sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Very good. So, if you want to, we can do some more questions and comments or whatever. So, if anyone would like to say anything, this is your opportunity. So, please fire away.
Hi, Ajahn. Thanks very much for translating the Vinaya Pitaka for Sutta Central. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I had a question actually for you that after you have translated the Vinaya Pitaka, what in your mind was actually, what the top thing in your mind that the Vinaya actually reinforces, like what you have read in the suttas actually?
Well, I think it reinforces, one of the things it reinforces is kind of why the Vinaya was laid down, what it is about. Because a lot of the rules of the Vinaya are kind of hard to make sense of from a modern perspective. And you realize that the reason why Buddha very often laid down rules was because lay people would complain. Yeah, so lay people would say, actually, these monks are not practicing properly. They're doing dodgy things. And then he would lay down rules. And sometimes that would be because they were indulging in things. Yeah, they were kind of doing luxurious things, and they were using golden shoes, and they were doing all kind of stupid stuff that monks shouldn't do. And so one very kind of obvious takeaway from the Vinaya is that the monks, monastics, should live simple lives. They shouldn't live luxurious lives. They shouldn't live lives of indulgence. That comes out in rule after rule after rule. But instead of thinking like that, it's very common for monks to think, okay, we have to keep the exact rules in the Vinaya, but if you have an iPhone, it's okay, because an iPhone isn't mentioned in the Vinaya. So it must be okay, right? The Buddha would have laid it down otherwise, right? He would have seen the future, laid down the iPhone. So it becomes a bit sort of, you keep the rule, but if something isn't mentioned, then it kind of is acceptable. But that's kind of missing the point. The point is the general idea, what is luxurious, what is kind of like, that's kind of one of the things that comes out of the Vinaya. Another thing that comes out of reading the Vinaya is that, which is basically similar to what I'm talking about now, is that the Vinaya is full of loopholes. And one of the first things you learn as a monk is all the loopholes in the Vinaya. Because sometimes it's handy to know the loophole, because sometimes you are in a situation where actually it is very useful, because some situation it is handy. But sometimes you can abuse that idea. And sometimes you can actually make a lot of bad karma and do many bad things which are not covered by the Vinaya. And so really, when we practice the Dhamma, it's important to remember that what we are doing is not, the Vinaya doesn't cover all the Dhamma. The Dhamma is much broader than the Vinaya. And so in the final analysis, the way to practice is to follow the suttas and not the Vinaya. The Vinaya is like the bare minimum. But actually, you have to go beyond the Vinaya. The Vinaya is rules, and rules can never cover all the circumstances in the real world. The real world is just too complex. And so you need to go back to the suttas. Be kind, yeah, live well, renounce. Yeah, these are the basic things in the suttas. Understand what the suttas are teaching. Unfortunately, it is far too common for, in the world to read all the rules and know all the rules kind of really well. But reading the suttas is much more unusual in the world. And people don't really have a proper understanding of the suttas. And so it becomes more like, okay, keep the rules. And that becomes often the be-all and end-all of these sort of things. Another thing which is very clear in the Vinaya, which I find very interesting, is that in the Vinaya it is quite clear that not everything comes from the same time period. It's very clear that certain rules and regulations come from the Buddha, other things are later. And you know that for a number of reasons. You can know that for reasons of the kind of vocabulary that is used, the kind of things that are mentioned that didn't exist early on, from comparing it to the Vinaya in other traditions and all of these kind of things. And so it is a much more layered text. So it gives you a very clear sense that these things are layered, and that there are only certain things that come from the Buddha. Not everything comes from him. And that puts you on the lookout, to be a bit more investigative in the way you treat the Dhamma and the Vinaya, but especially the Vinaya itself. So there are a number of things like that which I think come out of these things. And as I mentioned before, one of the really important things is the feeling that people in those days were real people. They were not born at that time because they had super duper powerful karma or whatever. They were actually real people, just like most other people these days. Thank you for that good question. That's a good one.
Ajahn, the monks has 257 rules.
227.
227.
Yeah.
The nuns has 311.
Yeah.
And the nuns are more difficult to teach.
What was that? Are they more difficult to teach? No, I think the reason why the nuns have more rule, there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that they inherited a large number of rules from the monks. So they already started out with a large number of rules, and then additional rules came on top of that. So if they had started from scratch with 0 rules, they may have had much less rules as a consequence. That's one reason. Another reason is that many of the rules that the nuns have are like subdivision of an individual rule for the monks. So, for example, the 8 Patidesanya rules of the nuns, 8 rules are equivalent to 1 rule for the monks. It's just subdivided into 8 sub-rules. The same thing with the Nisagya Pachitya rules of the rules of confession and relinquishment. It's the same kind of idea again. The nuns' rules are subdivided into many rules. So this is another reason why the nuns have more rules. A third reason why the nuns have more rules is because rules were laid down for the nuns after the Buddha's time. Whereas for the monks, the rules seem to have been laid down mostly by the Buddha because the rules are the same in all the different schools of Buddhism. For the nuns, the different schools have a different number of rules. That means that they were laid down after the schools separated, which would have been after the Buddha's time. So in other words, monks thought they had the power to lay down rules for nuns, so the monks would lay down rules for nuns. Even though the Buddha said specifically you should not lay down any new rules after I passed away, still they did that. Maybe they thought the nuns nuns are different or whatever, and so they laid down more rules for the nuns. So this is the reason. It is not because the nuns are more difficult to teach, it's more like for historical reasons that this has happened in this particular way. But it's interesting, the rules for the nuns and monks, are they slightly different or not? Maybe they are slightly different, because maybe men and women are a little bit different in the way they kind of relate to the world, and so because we are a little bit different kinds of rules. And I don't think overall you can say that one is more difficult than the other. It's just that maybe slightly different psychology, etc. If I look around the world, I see some really good monks, I see some really good nuns. I see some dodgy monks, I see some dodgy nuns. It's the same. I think maybe men are often a bit more extreme. then women are a bit more middle of the road very often. Yeah? Men are kind of the worst villains in history are usually men. Yeah, the kind of the really bad, the super duper bad people usually tend to be men, it seems. But sometimes the greatest saints are also men. Yeah, so men have kind of this very broad spectrum, and women are kind of more moderate somehow, it seems. I don't know if that's true or whether that's just my perception, but that's somehow how it seems. But in general, I would say I don't think there is any great difference between the genders. They are good and bad in both genders, and that essentially it's the same things that apply to both. That's what I would say. Yeah.
And can you remind us, I thought it was Ananda who asked the Buddha before he passed away, whether we can, whether the lesser rules or the less important rules can be done away with it.
Yeah.
And I thought the Buddha said yes.
He did, yeah.
But the Sangha did not.
Yeah.
Why not? Because some rules are no longer applicable.
Yeah. But at that time they were still applicable, probably, right? They may not be applicable now, but at that time they would still be applicable. And so the Sangha, the reason the Sangha decided that is that they said, well, the lay people, they know our rules. Yeah, and because the lay people know our rules, if we abolish those rules, the lay people will say, well, as soon as the Buddha dies, they abolish the rules. Yeah, what are these dodgy monks abolishing all the rules as soon as the Buddha passes away? And it's a fair point. Yeah, you can see why they would do that. But it's still interesting because it kind of leaves open the possibility that we should use these rules wisely. And I would say, at the very least, if certain rules can be shown to have been laid down after the Buddha, then surely we don't have to keep them. Yeah. In fact, the Buddha says we should not create rules after he has passed away. So that is fair to abolish that. And so I would encourage, if whenever I talk to the bhikkhunis, I would say, well, those rules that were not laid down by the Buddha, you don't have to keep them. Yeah, because the wasn't laid down by the Buddha. It's up to you. If you want to keep them, you can, but you certainly don't have to. And that is very helpful because some of the rules are actually very difficult to keep and very unreasonable. For example, rules on ordination, you can only ordain one person, one disciple every 2 years. Makes it very, very difficult to build up a bhikkhuni sangha because the rule is so very restrictive on what is allowable. So there is that opens up possibilities, and I think that we should use those openings to kind of make it more easy to have good sanghas, both male and female. Yeah.
Ajahn, as a follow-up to Carol's question,
Yeah.
why are the rules subdivided for the nuns?
Don't know. Don't know. I have no idea. It's just the way they
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
Do you know of like one rule that is subdivided into, let's say, 4 or 5?
Yes, well, that was the rule I was just mentioning before. That's actually the Pachitya number 39 for monks, and that is you're not allowed to ask for refined foods. There's 8 kinds of refined foods, and so then the nuns are given 8 rules, one for each food. Yeah, whereas for monks, all the 8 foods are in one rule. And the reason why that might be the case, and this is kind of interesting, is that it may be that it was always thought that the nuns should have at least as many rules as the monks. Yeah. So now the monks have 4 rules called Patidesanya rules. These are kind of a small category. The nuns probably didn't have any Patidesanya rules. So it was decided to take this one rule, divide it into 8, and make it into Patidesanya rule. Yeah, and this way the monks had at least as many rules as the monks. I think that may actually have happened because you find the same problem with the Nisagya Pachityas. The nuns only have 12 Nisagya Pachityas that are unique to themselves and 18 in common, right? But then it was probably thought, well, the nuns should have at least as many Nisagyas as the monks. They can't have less rules than the monks, right? I don't know. It's a strange way of thinking, but I think that may have been the idea behind this. And so what they did, they took one particular rule of monks, which had to do with not using the requisites in the wrong way, divided up into a number of sub-rules, and voila, the nuns also had 30 Nisagya Pachitya rules, which the monks also have 30, so then the nuns had at least as many as the monks had. So that may be the reason. So it's kind of sometimes the strange reasons going on there. So, yeah.
Ajahn, what are the 8 What are the 8 refined foods that are divided into?
They are
Just curious.
They are ghee, molasses, sugar, uh, uh, nabanitang, which is kind of a clarified kind of butter, the meat, fish, what else is it? Meat, paneer, yeah, something like that. You get a rough idea. It's kind of it's getting late in the day now. You're asking me these kind of tricky questions.
Last question from
Yeah.
me, but Ajahn. Is Sona the one mentioned, the one in the Vinaya? Is it the same Sona that was the one Buddha taught about the flute, the lute?
There's two different sonas.
Oh, two different.
So I will let me just. I actually had the story of the other sona here as well. So let me read that out for you because it starts in a kind of interesting way. So the one I read out was Sona Kutikanna. That's one sona, but there's another sona called what is he called again? So the other one is Sona Kollevisa. Sona Kollevisa is the one you are thinking of. So this is the story, very briefly, the story of Sona Kollevisa. This is the beginning of the story, right? So at one time, the Buddha was staying on the Vulture Peak at Rajagaha. At that time, King 𝐶𝑖𝐚 of Magadha ruled over 80,000 villages. And at Champa, there was a wealthy merchant who had a son called Sona Kollevisa. This is this son. He had been raised in great comfort, so much so that he had hairs growing on the soles of his feet. So he had never really walked very much, yeah? So the hair started growing on the soles of his feet. On one occasion, King Bimbisara had the chiefs of those 80,000 villages gathered because of some business. He then sent a message to Sona asking him to come. Sona's parents said to him, Sona, the king wishes to see your feet, but don't point them at him. Yeah, this is the idea of pointing the feet. Yeah, you're not supposed to point your feet. This is what you do here as well. Yes, you're all sitting very nicely with your legs folded because pointing your feet towards the Buddha is considered bad. Yeah, we still follow the same ideas that did 2,500 years ago. You can see again the same things coming out. Don't point your feet at him. If you just sit down cross-legged in front of him, he will be able to see them. He wants to see the hair on the soles of the feet, right? They then sent him away on a palanquin, and Sona went. He couldn't walk because of it was so delicate. Sona went to King Bimbisara. Upon arrival, he bowed to the king, sat down cross-legged in front of him. The king saw the hairs growing on the soles of his feet. Yeah, king was very satisfied. Yeah, this is kind of what kings do to amuse themselves. Yeah, very boring to be a king. Yeah. Then, after instructing those 80,000 chiefs in worldly matters, the king dismissed them, saying, I have instructed you in worldly matters. Now go and visit the Buddha. He will instruct us about the afterlife. So then they go to visit the Buddha, all of these 80,000 chieftains. Sona comes along. All those 80,000 chieftains, there are some basic, amazing miracles and marvelous things happening because the Buddha's 𝑒𝑟𝑒𝑒𝑒, his attendant, has all these psychic powers, and all these 80,000 chieftains, they want to bow down to the 𝑒𝑟𝑒𝑒𝑒 because they think he's the most powerful, until they make it clear that the Buddha is the main, the one who is worthy of being bowed down to, and eventually they all leave except for Sona, who asks for the going forth, and then he goes forth. And then after he goes forth, he does lots of walking meditation, lots and lots of walking meditation. But his feet are very soft and tender, because he has the hair growing on the soles of his feet. So he starts bleeding when he does all the walking meditation. And so the Buddha comes to see his walking path, and it looks like a slaughterhouse. There is so much blood on the walking path, blood everywhere. And so Sona thinks, maybe I should return to the lay life. And then the Buddha comes to him through psychic powers and say, find the middle way in exerting energy. You're exerting too much energy. It's like the playing of the lute. If the strings are too taut, then the lute sound is no good. If the strings are too slack, the lute sound is no good. The middle tension is where you find the right tone for the lute. The same thing with meditation practice. Don't walk too much, don't walk too little. Find the middle energy, and that is where you find enlightenment. And so Sona decides, I will not return to lay life after all. I will practice, and he becomes an arahant. And he has these beautiful verses that he speaks afterwards. Yeah, he talks about his arahantship and what it means. And you can read about that sutta in the Sutta Central. Yeah. It is in the Anguttara Nikaya 6's number 55 is the sutta. 55 6's. Please go home. Next time I come to Singapore, I will test you to see if you have read that sutta, and we'll see what happens. No, I will never test you, but you know what it's like. So, yeah, so that's that story in brief, Eiling. So thank you for that. Yeah. So, we still have a few more minutes if anyone else would like to say anything here.
Question? Okay, second last question. Because one last question here.
Hi, Ajahn. Yeah,
Hello.
in your first Sona story, you mentioned about the Buddha asked Sona to recite. Then he was able to recite the chapter of 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought the Pali Canon was compiled after the Buddha passed away. So this chapter of 8, where does it fit in? Are there compilation? So these are actually compilation that already existed at the time of the Buddha, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It may have been a compilation that existed very early on because these suttas are often regarded as very, very early. So they may have existed already as a kind of a group. It may have been smaller, however, in the beginning, because some of this, it's called a chapter of 8. So you would think they all had 8 verses, right? But actually, some of them have many more than 8 verses. So either those suttas were added or they were lengthened, maybe after the fact. So there's 2 possibilities, either that, or it is possible that the chapter was made later on, and that this story is from a later time, and then that it actually reflects what existed later on. That is another possibility. So it's hard to know which one, but the chapter of 8 is also found in the Chinese agamas as well, in Chinese translation. They are found, so it is certainly, there is some good evidence that it is from fairly early on, at least the suttas, and the chapter also called the chapter of 8, which is found in the agamas. So yeah, it's a little bit unclear exactly what happened, but yeah.
Okay, last question from Sis Hui Kim.
Thank you. Ajahn, can I just ask, please, is there a way we are supposed to ask, like, would you like to have this dish? Like, are you allowed to say, yes, I would like, you know, like, because I heard that you're not supposed to say, yes, I want it. You're supposed to hint, like, my shoes are worn down. But for us, like, you know, like Ajahn, would you like this? Are you allowed to say no? And is there a right way for us to ask?
No, if you ask, then I can say whatever I want. Yeah, because if you ask, then that's an invitation. So if you ask, then I can say things. Yeah, I may not, but I can. Yeah, I'm not obliged to say anything, but I can say things. But I cannot ask for things without someone actually offering it. But once you made an invitation, then it's okay. Then you can kind of say what you want. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask one last question? A long time ago, I heard Ajahn Brahm say, I hope I'm not mistaken, he said that Brahma Sahampati, Katikara the potter, and Gautama were once mates in a long time ago. Is that true? And is that a sutta or?
Yeah, there is a story behind that. I think that is a story that relates to the Bahya Sutta, I think, because the Bahya Sutta is quite controversial because Bahya becomes an arahant so quickly. And people say, look at Bahya, it's easy to become an arahant or whatever. So he then tells the story from the past where they were friends, they were living on a mountain, they were meditating really hard, and they had jhanas and all these kind of things. So he's pointing out that these were very, very well practiced people, and they, you know, all these famous people together living on this mountain together. So yeah, that's the story he's telling. I think the story itself, not found in the suttas, but found in the commentary. I think it's a commentary to the Bahya Sutta or something like that. Yeah. All right. So
we shall end there with the sharing of merits, and later if anyone would like to offer requisites.
Yeah.
Maybe Ajahn, after the sharing of merits, could you give a blessing for everyone? Short
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to do that. Okay. So very good. So it would
Just
yeah. So this is the sharing of the merit. So let's share the merit together. And as always, when we do share the merit, just keep your deceased or departed family members in mind and actually share it with them in your mind. So that's kind of the way they may be able to experience what we're doing today. So here we go. Idang menyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang menyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang menyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. So give a quick blessing. Now is the right time? Yeah. Okay. So it's not that you need a blessing because I know you're all very good people. And remember, the real blessing in the Dhamma is the quality of your heart. Have a good heart, all the good things will come back to you. But usually in the Bodhinyana Monastery, Ajahn Brahm gives the water blessing, and that is to traumatize you, so you never forget to be kind. Yeah, this is kind of the idea there. So you always remember the instructions of the Dhamma. So this is so I'll give you a quick blessing anyway, but you know what the real Dhamma is, of course. Nati me saranang anyang, Buddho me saranang varang, etena sacava jena sotite, hotu sambada. Nati me saranang anyang, Dhammo me saranang varang, etena sacava jena Nasotite hotu sambada. Nati me saranang anyang, Sangho me saranang varang, etena sacava jena sotite hotu sambada. Sadhu, sadhu. Very good.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the marvelous teachings today, as well as the last 2 days. So don't forget to come tomorrow, 7, not morning, but 7 p.m. For the Vesak Eve service, as well as candlelight procession, and the Vesak day the next day.
And also, Eileen, we should close off by doing the Arahang Samma Sambuddho
Yeah.
together. That's always nice at the end. So if you can please turn on the projector again, that would be great. Yeah. So let's do the Arahang. It's always nice to end off the day with paying homage to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So let's do that.
Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us pay respect to Ajahn.